Hey everyone, it's Tyler with Flying Company. This is episode 4 of the Gouge Series. Missed last week due to NBAA, but I was able to see my buddy Preston Holland there, the finance bra, aviation finance bra, also known as the private jet guy on Twitter X. So hey Preston, how you doing, bud?
What's up, Tyler? Sorry that I didn't put on my Patagonia vest. It is Patagonia vest season, so the Finance Pro vest. Unfortunately, it's in the closet. It's like in the closet, like right there. So if you need me to, I can go put it on.
Well, we can restart. No, it's good. Okay. So we're going to talk about aircraft aviation finance today. So in the words of Bob Slidell from Office Space, what would you say you do here?
So we are an aviation finance arranger. So we have relationships with 30 to 40 different lenders across the country that do airplane loans. And so we help advise our clients in the process. We help find them the best deal that is out there for exactly what they are doing. So whether that's single engine piston all the way through ultra long range business jets, we have clients all over the country, all over the world even. And basically they are looking for the right deal, the right structure for what their financial goals are. So, our typical competition is the balance sheet. We're typically competing against cash. And so how do we put together a structure that makes more sense to finance than to pay cash?
Okay, great. And so two-sided marketplace, just like so many things are in life. On the buyer's side, who are you typically working with? Are you working directly with the principal or a money manager, home office manager for them, or a chief pilot or aircraft manager? What does that typically look like on the buyer side?
Yeah, so usually you're assembling a aircraft transaction team. So that usually consists of someone who's buying the aircraft, let's call it a broker, sometimes the chief pilot, kind of depends on the size of the flight department, the organization, things like that. You have the aviation attorney, because attorney stuff in aviation is totally different than kind of your in-house counsel can handle. Like if you're in real estate and you have in-house counsel, they're probably not highly qualified to do aircraft transactions. Some sort of tax advisor usually is involved in that transaction as well. And then insurance. And then I'm going to bifurcate this a little bit between kind of small single aircraft sits in the back or sits in the front a lot of the times, single pilot type stuff. And then you have kind of your, usually mid-sized jet and up, right? So that's usually the management company gets involved. If it's self-managed, it's a little bit different, right? But if there's a outside management group, then they're usually involved in that transaction team. So we sit in the finance seats. As you think about putting together that transaction, usually starts with a first initial conversation with the principal, and then they will say, okay, here's my CFO, here's my family office, here's my advisors. In an ideal scenario, the principal is not having to be super involved in the process from a financing standpoint. They want to know kind of general term structures where we're at in the process, but they don't, it's not the highest and best use of time of a principal finding their tax return.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
And so that's typically, who we're dealing with. Again, when you kind of get into the owner flown market, so call it piston aircraft, even turboprop to a certain extent, and even, the occasional light jet where, kind of the principal is either flying themselves or they're managing the process themselves, they'll be a lot more involved. But that's typically who we're dealing with. And we have to collect an entire picture for the lender to be able to get comfortable with the credit, right? So we have to, how much cash they have, what's their cash flow like, what's their debt service like, all those kinds of things. We're gathering the documentation that supports the yes for the transaction. I don't know if you know this, Tyler, and if you've ever dealt with banks much, but a lot of the people inside of the ecosystem of a bank are trained to say no. They want to get to no, because banks are naturally, not very risk tolerant. And we like that. That is a feature, not a bug of the system. But we come in and we basically get them to yes, right? So how do we get them to yes as quickly as possible with the structure that we really want, from a, prepayment penalties, from interest rate, from amortization, down payment, advance rate, those kinds of things. Like, we're trying to get them to yes as easily and quickly as possible.
Okay, perfect. So we talked about the buyer side. Now let's talk about the other side, the relationships you have with, I think you said 40 banks. Like, why is it that somebody who's buying a plane can't just pick up the phone, call their local bank, and be like, hey, help me finance this?
Yeah. So if you're like a, let's call it, JP Morgan or Bank of America, you're a pretty big client for them. then, you should pick up the phone and call them. But every bank has a specific box for aircraft type. For instance, right? A lot of the big banks don't want anything older than 10 years. They don't want anything less than about $5 million of a loan value, right? So if you're buying, an older Phenom 300, or you're buying, something like that, they probably are not going to give you the most competitive terms in the market. So yeah, so we help find the right lender for the transaction. And it's not always your local bank. Call your local bank, right? Sometimes relationship pricing does drive a good outcome for you. I tell all of my broker friends and all of my, aircraft management friends, like, look, I am a phone call away for you to call me and say, this is what the bank offered us. And I will give you a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Like, yep, looks like a good deal. I would go ahead and take it. It's probably going to be your path of least resistance. Or, hey, that's probably not market. Or hey, you could sharpen that up based off of what I know about the client, right? So, if you've got large investable assets, you have strong position in liquidity, even though your bank probably does you a lot of favors in a lot of places, they may not be doing you a favor on the aircraft. I'm working with a client right now who has a pretty sizable relationship with their bank, and their bank offered good, not great terms, right? So if you have a big relationship with a bank, you should be getting great terms. And so it was like, hey, look, I think that we can probably make this better. And then on the flip side, right, a lot of people don't want the aircraft in the same bank with all the rest of their stuff, if you will, right? So maybe a real estate transaction starts to get a little bit, interesting, and you have to have a conversation about that. And they say, well, yeah, but like you have this airplane, like, it just creates a conversation that's like not really worth having from a business standpoint.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so when do you get looped into this? Like when should you get looped into this as part of the transaction team?
Usually later than we would like to.
Yeah,
which is always the case. Yeah. Which is always the case. And, and sometimes, I'll get a phone call. I remember very specifically last year on Christmas Eve, I was driving to run some, last minute errands, and I get a phone call from a broker friend of mine, and he goes, hey man, XYZ bank is really not helping us out here. And our deposit goes hard in 30 days, and we can't get it back. Help. Right. And so it was like, okay, day before Christmas, right? I get on the phone with a client, and it's, we're working kind of through the holiday season to try and get the package together. And the first day the banks are back in, it's on their desk. And basically, we're soliciting offers, and we ended up closing 2 days before the deposit went hard. And so sometimes it's like, hey, I need help, right? I need a life raft. I need like, we got to move now. And then other times it's, we're coming in, ideally, right? You have an airframe type picked out, and you have a budget so that we can generally say, this is about what it's going to be. And so that is an ideal point for us to get looped in. Like, hey, we've got these 3 or 4 serial numbers picked out. We haven't exactly figured out which color we like or which interior we like. But generally speaking, we're looking at a 2016 to 2018 Phenom 300, right? And so then we can take that information. We'll go ahead and start the process from a financing standpoint. So we'll, plug in with the team, get in contact with the CFO or family office or whoever is the right person there. We'll start collecting the documents. We'll kind of have all of that ready. That way, when the LOI goes out and it gets accepted, that's typically when we're sending in all of the information to the bank and saying, look, here's our closing date. Here's what we're working towards. Here's the aircraft. Here's the credit. This is what we're looking for from a structure standpoint. We'll solicit those bids. That usually takes 2 to 3 days to get those actual bids in the door. Once we have those in kind of indicated term sheets, we'll sit down with the principal and the rest of their team, and we'll say, this is what our options are. Our advice based off of XYZ scenario, right? If there's a hard deadline and timing, right? You need someone who we have done a lot of transactions with that we know will close fast. Like, we would suggest using them, or, kind of just depends on what the goal is from the transaction. And then we'll help advise. And then we walk them all the way through till closing day. So all the way through till closing day, we're managing a lot of the internal politics and things of the bank for them on their behalf, because we do a lot of transactions with them. We know which appraiser they're going to use. We know how backed up their appraiser is. We know what their credit team is looking for from a, documentation standpoint. So we're trying to kind of front run a lot of that and really create a lot of efficiency in the transaction from the financing standpoint. Because if you talk to anybody in transaction world, lending is always a giant pain in the butt. And that's what we do all day, is we kind of take a lot of that on and try and front run it so that it's less of a pain. And that's large household bank names, that's small banks you've never heard of, and everything in between.
Okay, perfect. You know, in modern day America, you can finance a pumpkin spice latte through Klarna, right? But traditionally, it's been reserved for like the larger ticket items, like a house, a car, what have you, a boat, right? And when normal people like who are accustomed to doing that, like it's credit score, debt to income ratio, and then the collateral of the house or the car or the boat, right? Aircraft, it's a completely different ball of wax. So can you talk about some of the levers involved in that, liquidity, cash flow, and then I think you mentioned earlier the use case, right? Is it a owner phone kind of thing, or is the principal in the back with professional pilots?
Yeah. So just to kind of divide those two, right? The owner flown, generically speaking, is going to be a lot more like buying a house than it is going to be like buying a car or a boat or anything like that. When you're talking about like an ultra long range or mid-size aircraft, it's going to be kind of like buying a business, right? When you talk about like what type of financials that you need to be able to disclose. And it is nothing like commercial real estate. That is the one thing that is, it's like, oh, well, you have the asset, that I'm good for it, then you should approve it, right?
Yeah.
This is a non-cash generating asset. So we have to prove to the bank that you have plenty of cash reserves, you have plenty of cash flow, predictable cash flow that, you will be able to pay the note back. That is kind of at the end of the day, that is what we are trying to demonstrate to the bank. And so, typically what a standard package looks like is tax returns, bank statements. So tax returns, both personal and businesses, K1s, things like that to kind of demonstrate the cash flow. The bank statements demonstrates what types of reserves that you have, where the down payment's coming from, things like that. And then there's some qualitative things that we also need to understand. What type of industry are you in? What are some of the headwinds to that industry? What are the tailwinds? Are you contracting with the government that's shut down right now, right? Those types of things, is it a contract that could end quickly? And so we're trying to kind of paint that entire picture, because at the end of the day, it's going to get in front of an underwriter who is in a dungeon somewhere, and they're going to sit here and try and tell you why you cannot afford this, right? And so we're trying to head off all of this. We're trying to front run all that, right? And then on the asset side, right? Like banks, all of that is very typical for any sort of transaction, right? Small business loan, whatever. But then when you add the aircraft in, it's like, well, how are you going to use it? Is it going to be 135? Who's going to manage it? Is it on engine programs? What engine programs? Why does that matter? What is the airframe times? What are the upcoming maintenance activities? Like all of those kinds of things are also what we're trying to get the bank comfortable with and understand why they are in a good collateral position across the board. Because I don't know if you know this, Tyler, but airplanes depreciate. They don't appreciate unless it's like 2021. But, 64 days out of the year, these things are depreciating assets. And so can you afford to take the depreciation hit? Like bonus depreciation, great tool, but there's real depreciation of the aircraft as well. I bought it for 10 million. I sold it for 8. You're out $2 million of, value. And so the bank has to be comfortable that you can kind of take that. And then also in the structuring, right? How are we putting together the structure so that you're always maintaining a positive equity value in the aircraft is another piece of all of that. And then we're trying to help advise you, right? Hey, I know you want a 20-year amortization, but the reality is that at the end of your 5-year term, your chances of being upside down in this airplane go up as you lengthen the amortization. Because if that thing's depreciating at 7% clip per year, or let's say it's, I don't know, it's like on the depreciation curve where that is likely to happen, we don't want you to have a very bad experience in aircraft ownership. So we want to make sure that, you understand kind of all the things that are at play here. So that's a little bit of like, how we plug in and try and offer, good sound advice to our clients.
Love it. Okay. So final question, what are the biggest mistakes that you see people making on the buy side when it comes to financing their aircraft?
Yeah. It really starts with assembling that transaction team, right? If you don't have a good transaction team that's legal, tax, brokerage, finance, it's going to be very cumbersome for you as a buyer because, if you're not buying the aircraft at the right price, then it misses appraisal, right? All of these things kind of cascade into one another. And so getting the right representation to purchase the aircraft is huge. How are you structuring your tax? If that changes the day before closing, which I had happen one time, it's going to create a nightmare scenario for you. So like making sure that you assemble the right team. If your in-house counsel is going to negotiate your deal, like your chances of something getting screwed up or the other side having way better counsel for you than you on an aircraft transaction. But I would say like that is the number one mistake that I see is like not assembling the good team and then also not listening to everybody, right? Being like, oh, well, I know better. We've done 22 transactions this year. We'll finish the year at between 30 and 32. And we do this every day, all day. Like, listen to us, right?
Perfect. Okay. Well, speaking of assembling the team, where do people find you and find more about Prestige?
Yeah. So it's prestigefinance.com. Is where you find out more about us. If you want to engage with me personally, PrestonHolland.com is my newsletter that I write. I haven't written in a couple of weeks because I've been busy. But you can find it at PrestonHolland.com. And then the best way is go find me on Twitter because that's where I hang out. If I'm going to hang out on social media, I'm on LinkedIn sometimes, but mostly on Twitter. Preston Holland.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's been spicy today. So, all right. Thank you, brother. Appreciate you, man. And that is time. Talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thanks, man.